Adam, thank you so much for joining me here today on my Cyber Intelligence Weekly Spotlight series, where we talk about the human side of cybersecurity and technology. We have known each other for a number of years being in the tech industry here in Pittsburgh, and I've always appreciated your insights and perspectives and your entrepreneurialism when it comes to how you go about your business. So I'm very, very excited to speak with you here today and have you as a guest on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Like you said, we've been kind of rubbing shoulders for the last several years, every single Pittsburgh technology event there is. So it's great to sit down and kind of talk shop for a little bit.
Amen. Yeah, thank you for taking the time. And maybe to get things rolling here, so maybe for those who haven't yet out there for our listeners, how would you maybe describe your background and your journey and what you do today for Busy Beaver, and maybe give a little uh, uh, quick commercial for Busy Beaver for those who aren't local to the area?
Yeah, so my background is in traditional IT. So, graduating college, I kind of got into a general sort of network administrator role, then transitioned to a convenience retail chain, Sheets, which I'm sure you heard of being in the Pittsburgh area. And
Absolutely.
then I made my journey over to Busy Beaver. So I was not familiar with Busy Beaver when I took the job. Busy Beaver is a 19-store home improvement chain in the Pittsburgh area. Started in 1962, and it really has a stronghold in Pittsburgh. So, a lot of the older generation is very familiar with Busy Beaver. They've been shopping with us, 40, 50 years. Uh, our attempt now is, kind of getting in the younger generation, showing them that we can compete with the big guys, and we do that by offering, legendary customer service. And, I think a lot of the things we'll talk about today, we talk about how technology kind of lets us compete with those big guys.
Yeah, and I love how your career has evolved there from coming in as a system specialist in the early days, and now VP of Business Intelligence and Strategy. And um, you have, I feel like, done a lot to keep Busy Beaver very competitive in a tight marketplace in the home improvement center, right? You guys are up against giants every day. Um, and to do that successfully, I feel like you have to be innovative, and I feel like you've done a lot of that. Can you maybe give our listeners a little taste of some of the accomplishments that you've had over the years, and maybe some of those defining moments where you knew data analytics and how that rolls into strategy would be really important to not only your success, but the success of Busy Beaver?
Yeah. So, I look at my kind of career early on at Busy Beaver, and when I came in, the current owner, who was a relatively new owner at that time, I came in 2015. He had just bought the business at the end of 2013, and he was ready to make some big changes. And one of the first things, that I got tasked to do was kind of put in a new ERP system and kind of transform our business that way. And, I built trust with the ownership by getting that project done very quickly. And then, that first year, all of a sudden, I'm getting pulled into these meetings that aren't really IT related to kind of get my thoughts on it. And I would bring in the data, and then, he would listen, the other executives would listen. So that was kind of the start of how I got involved in other aspects of the business. And, because it was a new system, in my prior career, I would set up a system, and, I just made sure it ran without an error, and that was all I was responsible for. But because this had such an impact on our business, I kind of had to learn all the processes. So whether it was, how to special order a window at a door, or how to match an invoice at our headquarters, or, ringing point of sale, I kind of learned all those processes so I could document it and have it ready for our employees and staff to be able to know how to do things. And, because of my execution of that, our owner really came to me in 2022 when we were opening this new store. And he said, you know, I want this new Delmont store to be the most technologically advanced store in home improvement. And, that was kind of a big ask. And, my head starts spinning. And, so we start looking at some different technologies. So with Carnegie Mellon being around Pittsburgh, there's a lot of interesting companies out here. We end up kind of working with an autonomous inventory scanning robot company. We
Yeah.
originally started with one in Pittsburgh, but we end up going to some other partners outside of Pittsburgh. And then the electronic shelf labels. So if you've been to Best Buy, they deploy them. I think everyone knows Kohl's. Kohl's was actually one of the first to do that. So some of those technologies have kind of gotten us some publicity. And people are like, wow, I didn't know Busy Beaver was still around. And wow, they're doing these really neat things. I want to be part of that. I want to check it out. So that's kind of how it all started, kind of me kind of coming in and putting in this new system and kind of learning all aspects of the business. And then that challenge by our owner, Joe Cowan, and then him empowering me to kind of do these things kind of led us where we are today.
I think that's great. I mean, Joe's a younger guy, right? And I think very visionary, focused, and for him to see that in you and trust in you to go out and build that and come back with ideas. I mean, how much did that mean to you, right? To feel that trust and to have that sort of challenge and to be able to act on it like you did. I mean, I remember when you guys came out with like the Badger, robot and the digital pricing. I was like blown away, right? When you guys announced that. I'm like, that is like the coolest thing ever. To be able to try to do that in a massive chain would probably take years and years and years to do, right? And many, many layers of bureaucracy. But like with you guys, it was much more organic conversation. How can we get this done? And let's go.
Yeah, like you said, that is the part about working for a privately owned company that you can like just run like that. And what's funny is I know that Menards has actually been in our Dalmont store doing secret shops, evaluating some of the technologies that we've done. And since we did this in 2022, I know of many other retailers that have, 60 robots deployed. I know one of our peers down south, Steins, they have 14 robots. And I know that Home Depot is looking to get into that space. So it was kind of neat, kind of being an industry leader and kind of being this quote unquote no name company out of Pittsburgh. And having that trust from Joe really meant a lot to me. And I, try to do my best to kind of live up to that expectation and trust that was given.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I know your role, I feel like in has the ability to touch so many different parts of the organization. How do you build trust within the organization to get other leaders to trust you and the systems and the data and the digital trust that you put in place and even to trust your ideas, right? Like how does that or how do you get that to work in your mind?
I think you kind of have to, meet people where they are. Uh, I also think it's important to for them to understand the why more than just the how.
Yep.
And I also like to say, the medium is the message. So, how you communicate is, more important than the communication itself. So some people, I'm able to communicate with, via email and uh, Teams messages, and we work just fine, and we can get a lot accomplished. Other parts of the business, I need to be with them where they are. So that might be on the front line of the store, talking face to face, seeing their real problems and finding solutions for them. So I think it's just kind of adapting to each aspect of the business because each aspect of the business is different. They have different desires and needs. And also, the human part is, not everyone's able to digest things the same way. So, how you communicate is very important.
Yeah, and people are so visual. People are visual learners too. And uh, you work in a very visual and tangible industry. Do you have any unique examples of how you've like demonstrated your ideas or uh, like even the price or the digital pricing? Like, was there anything you did along the way to sell that idea to help people visualize it, make it real?
Yeah. So, again, we are in our industry, if you think hardware, people like the touch and feel of things. That's probably one of the reasons, the brick and mortar hardware store has survived so long and probably will continue to survive. So, whether it's your customers or employees, they still kind of like the touch and feel things. So, when we rolled out ESLs, we actually piloted several different providers. We actually did real wild testing where we had, one brand of ESLs and one out, another brand and another out, and then real world examples of how those made their life more efficient. So being able to flip the screen so you can see how many are on hand, how many are on order, that kind of got bought in from the rest of the leadership team that might have been skeptical. Why are we spending all this money on ESLs for like a vanity project? They kind of got that bought in of, hey, this is going to work. And oh, now I can, scan an item and it flashes. So now I can pick items quicker and put items back quicker and more accurately. So I
Yeah,
just think that having that real world demo is clutch.
that's so cool. Um, Tell me about any leadership shifts that you have made as your role expanded, throughout technology and more into analytics and enterprise strategy. I feel like you're definitely a student of leadership and always trying to learn and improve. I would love to hear like what's been a big shift for you, what's helped you along the way, anything that you've learned there.
Yeah, I would say, my natural instinct is to just kind of be a doer, to put my head down and do. And, as my role has expanded, I really have learned that, just because the technical implementation might be pretty straightforward, the change management piece is much more important than the actual technology portion. So, I can understand the technology, know how to uh, integrate it with our different systems, get it to work. But if the change management isn't really thought through, then that, solution or initiative is just going to fail. So,
Yeah,
I've learned that you have to bring all the leaders to the table and thoroughly vet the process.
love that. Love that. Are there any scar stories that you'd be willing to share along the way, right? So I always like to say sometimes the best opportunities for learning are sometimes when we fall down and skin your knee and you get that scar, right? So be curious if there's anything, you'd be willing to share that something that taught you a great lesson that you still think about and carry with you today.
Well, I actually probably have one potentially going on right now, but that starts a little bit too fresh, and we'll hope that will rebound and it won't be a scar. But one, I'll talk about it. I'll try to be very, generic about it, as not to upset any, solutions providers or vendors. But essentially, uh, there was this solution and partner who worked with one of our peers. They actually worked with a few of our peers in kind of adjacent industries. So they were more hardware stores. So they were, 5 to 10,000 square feet, not, a home improvement center like us, which is 40 to 60,000 square feet.
Right.
And, they absolutely love this solution, love this partner. Um, and, it saved them millions of dollars. And, the company, the solution, it's a great solution. It's a great technology and it works very good for a lot of people. And it was one of those things where I probably wanted it to work because I wanted to be like this hero of saving us all this money. Our leadership was like, well, here's money on the table that if we implement this, we're going to save this much, which, move forward with this as quickly as possible. And, the vendor, the sales guy, they always want to sell something. They want someone to work with. And I don't think that we realized the way that we purchased items and the way we ran our business, logistically, it just didn't really make sense for this model and solution to work for us. So even though it worked for a lot of peers and we wanted it to work, it just ultimately didn't manifest itself in, an ROI and results.
Yeah, and look, those are those are lessons learned on the battlefield, and sometimes you can only make the decisions with the information you have at hand, right? And um, I appreciate you sharing that. And sometimes you have to give yourself a little grace for making mistakes, and those things happen. It's tough to get full information and complete information and accurate information all at the same time. And sometimes you just got to go with what you got. And you know, sometimes you learn the hard way, right? Um, but it's how you respond to that, right? How you come back from that. Um, that's great. So talk to me about building an org that's more data driven and thinking about being more digitally mature, but more so in the mid market, like you referenced, right? So
Right.
if for all the mid market CIOs and IT leaders out there that want to become more data driven, digitally mature, what are some of the investments that you would recommend prioritizing on a limited mid market style budget, right?
Well, I think before anything, at mid market, the three, and you might not expect me to say this, but I would say infrastructure, security, and communication. So, obviously you want dashboards, you want AI, but if you don't have a solid infrastructure in place, it's not going to run well. If you don't have, a good cybersecurity and incident response in place, if something goes bad, you're out of luck. And then, communication. If you don't have a great way of communicating uh, data or insights across your organization, it doesn't matter how much data you have, how many insights you have, how many dashboards, you're not going to be able to communicate to the people. So I would start with those fundamentals.
Yeah, I mean, without those fundamentals, it's like building on, a foundation of sand, right? Like you can't have a successful data strategy, innovation strategy without those things. And uh, that's key and core to all those strategies, right?
Right.
Um, I would love to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned AI automation. Um, can you tell me some use cases that, you guys are implementing, looking at that are delivering real operational value and not just hype? What's working well for you guys?
Yeah, so we've actually deployed a frontline app for our employees. So we're working with a company called Fast Query, and they are specializing at the moment in independent hardware. So they're working with companies like us that, deal with, your ACEs, your True Values, your Do It Best. So the, model is very keen on, the types of problems and questions and projects that come into our stores. So that has been a very powerful tool for all our frontline employees.
That's super cool. So what are some of the use cases that they're using this for that are really like resonating? And the
So
options good so far?
yeah, so there's a lot of different things. I can name a few different examples. So one, customer comes into a store with this widget. You see that happen, and they typically go up to the cashier like, "Hey, do you have one of these?" And
Yeah,
then it's
yeah.
like, "Hey, I'm gonna page Bob. Bob's our plumbing expert." Well, now that cashier, if Bob's busy, she can actually take a picture of the item and the AI will match it against our catalog
Oh,
and
that's
see
cool.
what product actually is. So that is one kind of cool scenario. Another thing is, in some of our more rural areas, we'll get some people that, don't speak English. They might speak Spanish, and the app itself can actually understand Spanish, answer back to the customer in Spanish, and then it's written in English. So then the associate can go find the product.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, so it's pretty good at offering us, it's basically an AI co-pilot for our employees.
Yeah, for people that are touching, feeling, interacting with your customers, that's so cool. Um, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on Adam, like what's an overhyped aspect of AI right now that you think is like not up to, the hype?
Well, I think just the general hype that, AI is going to replace everyone, replace every job, and AI agent's going to be doing this. This job's going to be, gone in 1 year. Or the hype that, like, hey, if you're not doing X, if you're not doing Y, then you're behind. The way I look at it right now, I feel like everything's changing so quickly that everyone's behind. So I think you just kind of got to keep your ear to the ground, keep plugged in, and keep trying and looking at different solutions and thinking about how AI can work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that aspect is hype too, right? It's like your people could be more effective if they could adopt it. They could do other things. They could maybe delight the customer in different ways that you never even dreamed of by adopting it. It's not necessarily replacing those frontline workers, right? So I agree with that notion and that concept. Um, so just to get on, the cyber training for a minute, right? And how that applies to an org like yours that is very tech forward and tech focused. As organizations rely more on data, on technology, these cutting edge connected systems, robotics, digital pricing, right? It introduces more business risk that's related to cyber risk. Um, how do you think about cybersecurity within your overall strategy, and how important is it to you?
Yeah, like you said, cyber risk is just business risk. Like it's a
Yeah,
fundamental foundation of our business continuity that, if we aren't thinking about cybersecurity, then, it's got to be that important to your business because, if you're just focusing on preventing incidents, um, I think you're going to be kind of set up for failure. I think you just kind of got to embed that security mindset in all parts of your organization, all parts of your workflow. So then, you're just building resilience as an organization. And I think, again, with today's, my owner probably won't like me to say this, but it's not a matter of, if, it's kind of when and to what severity. So I think that, data breaches, cyber incidents, whether it's, hopefully it's something insulated to one terminal, one person, or whether it's, these things you hear of with Lowe's and Home Depot. It's just a matter of time. So I think that, you know, cybersecurity has to be in the forefront of a business, planning.
Absolutely. Um, when you're evaluating some of these newer technologies and the things that you like to, take some risks and chances on and to enhance the customer experience, be more tech forward, like how do you balance some of that speed and innovation with security, privacy, operational resilience? Like I'm sure that's part and parcel to your thought process when, you know, putting something out there, but how do you personally think about that and balance that in your own mind?
Yeah, it can be a challenge because your larger organizations, you have your CISO and then your CTO, and they might get in a room and argue, and I kind of have to have these internal arguments in my head, and I think you have to realize that speed and security, they don't necessarily have to be opposites. I think with the right guardrails, a clear understanding of what the risk is, uh, bringing the right leaders, to the table from, our organization and then from, the vendor solution organization. I think if you just kind of outline things and get a, full understanding of, um, of what's involved and what the risks are, that you can still move fast and still be secure.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not mutually exclusive, and you can do both well at the same time. And I know you keep your eye on both of those fronts, so that's fantastic. Um, Very good. So just we're getting close on time, and just have a couple questions left. But I'm curious to hear from your mind, are there any big misconceptions that business leaders have around the role of technology um, and data and innovation on how that drives performance, right? Like you guys have been very successful at innovating and doing a lot of great new things and having that also be really core to who you guys are and how you drive success. Um, why aren't more companies doing that, I guess, right? Like what are some of the misconceptions that they might have that is driving them not to do that?
Yeah, well, there's a number of kind of different misconceptions. Sometimes I think people think that some of the technologies that we've deployed are too complex, or you need a staff of 100 to deploy them efficiently. I think that's one misconception. And the misconception the other way is that that the technology itself is responsible for the performance, but in reality, the performance comes from the data, and then that data is used to decide this. Excuse me. The data is used to drive the decisions, but the decisions need to drive an action, and then with the action, you have to have accountability. So, even, earlier, one of the questions you were talking about, in regards to data, you don't know how many different reports and things I get asked for. And a lot of times I'm like, if I give you this data, what action are you going to take based on if the data says this or if the data says that? And if someone can't give me like a clear answer, it's like, well, this is going to go into the queue and be addressed at a later time.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
so
that
I think like to wrap that up, it's just like, yeah, the solution itself isn't going to just drive performance. We were talking earlier about how I get the privilege to be at a lot of different conventions and see a lot of different solutions. And there's a lot of really cool demos out there. But sometimes I think that there are solutions and demos being created for problems that don't exist. So I like to start with the problem and then find the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I love that accountability aspect, right? Without that accountability, you could have the greatest technology, put the greatest systems in place, but if you don't have the people driving the accountability, um, you're not going to get the value that you want out of it. So I love that question you ask when people come to you asking for things or asking for reports. Like, tell me how you're going to use this to drive X, Y, Z. So that I think a lot of people can take a page out of your book with that for sure. Uh, well, cool. Would love to end it on a question I love to ask. If you could put a message on a billboard for other technology, cyber executives, either about, whether it's data or AI or cyber, or innovation in IT, um, as a daily reminder, what would you say? What would be your advice?
So this is a billboard. So one that maybe you could kind of use for like cybersecurity, but has the hot one topic of AI, and that is AI is a multiplier, but make sure it's multiplying the right things. So data exposure, cyber risk can be multiplied when AI is kind of thrown at something carelessly. So that
Yeah.
might be a good billboard for you. And then kind of a billboard that kind of would go along kind of the Busy Beaver story is you're not competing on technology, you're competing on how you use it. So, like I said, you can have a lot of cool technologies, but if it's not solving a problem, then it's just uh, a very expensive tool. Because I like
Yeah.
to talk about a process. If we're looking to automate or streamline or bring technology across to a process, like I like to kind of thoroughly vet it manually and make sure that it's a good process, manually, because if you throw technology on it or you throw AI on it, it's just going to be a really expensive broken process. So
Exactly. Yeah, it's not the technology that's the differentiator. In fact, a lot of these, like, you know, some of the most powerful technologies we've ever seen or come in contact with, we now all have access to with a $20 a month subscription, right? So, um, it's how you use it, how you deploy it, how you build the accountability models around it. Um, so I love that. That's a great soundbite too. It's not the technology, it's how you use it. Um, so that's a great I think that's a great way to end it, man. Um, I really appreciate you taking some time and opening up and sharing some of your stories with me, sharing some of your philosophies and scars and things you've learned along the way. Um, I think you've been a great champion for the Pittsburgh technology community, and like you said, being a part of a great organization with great leadership to give you those opportunities to allow you to do that as well. Um, Sometimes that's what it takes, right? But to have you here as part of um, our podcast, it's been a great pleasure and an honor. So I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. Sure, we'll see each other soon enough.
Yes, sir. Yes, we will. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Until the next time, we will see you all soon.